listeners, welcome to our second Open Ocean episode.
It was so cool to learn about NOAA last episode, and now we are finally moving on to what an open ocean actually is.
Wait, so what's an open ocean again?
Isha, that's the whole point of the episode, remember?
Oh, yeah! Good point. Wait, Ria, what's the open ocean again?
The open ocean counts as anything that is basically far from the shores, and the majority of the open ocean is really deep as a result. The open ocean is actually really special because it's one of the places that is super abundant, with giant ocean animal species that can vary from seals, whales, dolphins, to orcas, walruses, and narwhals. There are 4 oceans.
Actually, 5. There's the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Southern Ocean, Indian Ocean, and the Arctic Ocean.
The Southern Ocean? When did that become an ocean? What even is that?
Okay, so the Southern Ocean is actually an ocean that was first noticed by the U.S. Board on Geographic Names as the body of water that extends from Antarctica all the way to the thin line of longitude, which last time I checked was around 60 degrees south.
Nice! So wait, what were we talking about again? Hey, didn't we say we could talk about poisonous skin pigs? I am super excited to hear about those.
Wait, Ria, we first need to cover more about what an open ocean is.
So, what's the difference between the open ocean and the deep sea? Can't they both count as the same thing?
So, actually, the first 200 meters of the ocean going down is the open ocean. The open ocean mostly counts as the epipelagic zone.
What?
The sunlight zone.
Apparently, scientists believe that most organisms that live in the open ocean actually live their whole life without ever touching the shore. They spend their lives surrounded by water without even knowing that anything else exists.
Some of the most common creatures in the open ocean are turtles, dolphins, squid, fish, sharks, whales, etc. And the open ocean serves them each a very unique purpose.
Can we get to the poisonous pigs now?
Wait, we first need to listen to what Ms.Jenny has to say about the open ocean.
Ooh, yay! I love talking to our guests. Ms.Jenny works at NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration.
Wow, isn't that also a government branch dedicated to learning more about the ocean's wonderful and weird treasures?
Yes, and that is what will make this episode super exciting to our listeners.
Let's go and ask Miss Jenny some questions.
We looked up the definition of an open ocean, and we found
A ton of definitions for it.
And we're wondering what's the actual definition? Because there were so many.
Yeah, I don't know if there is an exact definition, so I'm not sure I'm going to be your best helper there. But I don't know if you really need to have a definite, a definition. But basically, the open ocean is everything away from the coast. So we consider open ocean like a couple miles off the coast. So habitat that's not on the coast. So pretty much anything away. Is there an actual distance? I don't know. I'd have to look up what we define that as, but it's pretty much anything off the coast.
So that counts as the deep sea too, underneath?
Well, the deep sea is the water underneath. So deep sea is it's actually the water and the seabed, the seafloor, underneath. And so off the coast here of California, we have a continental shelf. So we have the continental shelf along the coast, which is basically an extension of land that is, we're all one globe, one earth. We're all interconnected. And we just have a lot of ocean on top of a lot of it. So basically the seabed looks like what looks outside your window without the houses, without the cars, without the roads, but under the ocean.
Yeah.
And then, of course, with all that water moving around, there's a lot of erosion and moving around, and materials kind of congregate. So we have this continental shelf that's a couple 100 feet deep, and that's not considered deep sea. That's called shelf habitat, and light can still penetrate to the bottom. But the deep sea is where you start going deeper and deeper, and our longest waves of light, which are the red wavelengths, disappear, and it's no longer any light whatsoever. So it's about 1,000 feet and deeper is considered the deep sea. But there's I'm sure you've seen some of the diagrams. There's a whole bunch of different terminology like midwater and all that in between. But in general, beyond 1,000 feet is deep sea, and it's super interesting.
So what would happen if we didn't have open oceans?
Yeah.
What would happen if we didn't have open ocean? We'd have less ocean. The ocean is about 75%, 78% of our planet. And most of that is open ocean, meaning away from a continent. So we have these continents spread out around the globe, and the coastlines are along those continents. So most of the ocean is away from land, in between these continents. So we would just have a lot less water. It'd be a little bit like a different planet.
How would it affect the animals living there?
If we didn't have, are you talking open ocean or deep sea?
The open ocean.
How would it affect the animals? Well, there'd be less habitat. Open ocean there's a couple different ways to look at the open ocean. A lot of animals that live in the open ocean are drifters, and they basically just drift the currents, like gelatinous zooplankton, like jellies, different types of jellies, and other types of animals like salps and ctenophores. Those are all really cool gelatinous animals, and they really like being out on the open water, away from the surf, where the surf would just crumble them all up and they would dissipate. A lot of seabirds like the open ocean because they basically use their nose to find food and smell their way across ocean basins to find food. A lot of the open ocean, though, is also not that productive. Most of the life that we have on the ocean is near the coastline. So, they say like the most amount of life is within the first 100 miles of a coastline. And then beyond that, the amount of marine life really drops off. So a lot of times in ocean conservation, there's somebody who lives down in your area, in Carmel area, named Jay Nichols. And you may have heard of him. He wrote a book called Blue Mind, and it's all about
Yeah.
Have you heard about that? He says to help the ocean, we have to put less in, take less out, and protect the edges. And it really makes sense because most of the life we have is within the first 100 miles of a coastline. And then it's not that there's no life beyond that, it's just a lot less.
Okay.
A lot less.
So, what makes the open ocean so special for animals?
This is a good question. I think there's things that I think are special about it. What I think is awesome about the animals that use it is that they have to use different types of cues for navigation. We rely a lot on our sight to figure out where we are and orient. We use our smell, use touch. And when you're on the open ocean, it's just water everywhere.
Yeah.
So how do animals orient themselves? I think that's a cool mystery depending on the species that it is. How do they do that? And there's some different thoughts about that. It could be light, could be magnetic, could be temperature related. But I think that's a really interesting part about the open ocean and how animals navigate. And some animals will cross an ocean for a purpose, like for food, migration, or they might be crossing an ocean for breeding or a combination. So I think it's kind of interesting to think about it that way, and that it's a place where some animals live, but also an area for animals to cross to get somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's open. I've always been really interested, I'm sure you are too, of people that row across oceans in those crazy rowboats. And like they row from one coast to the next, and like the things they see along the way, like it fascinates me because I'm like, what's it like? I've been on a lot of ships that where I've always been within 100 miles of shore. But to cross over, like out into the open, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
I think the other thing out there is that, from the human perspective, it would be really scary because sea conditions change and there's big waves and rogue waves. And I think it's fascinating how animals live amongst those dynamics, I'm not sure if that's answering your question, but those are some of the things that come to mind for me when I think about the open ocean.
So, do like the animals in the open ocean have any special adaptations that animals that live in other habitats don't have?
Ooh, I love that question. What adaptations? Well, it depends what type of animal you are. If you're a seabird, there are a lot of seabirds that they spend the most of their time offshore on the open ocean. And so one of their adaptations that is really, really good is their sense of smell. And they have these two nostrils on top of their bill, which is kind of like they're really big. That's why they call them the tube noses.
Like,
And the airflow goes through up their nose, and so they can smell really well. And what they're smelling for is the smell of food. And it turns out when you have phytoplankton, you have other animals like the zooplankton animals and other fish. And when they eat the phytoplankton and they eat the zooplankton, there's a chemical release called dimethyl sulfide. I just learned this like a year or so ago, and I think it's so fascinating. So I wanted to share it with you. There's actual odor emitted when animals are being eaten and when phytoplankton is being eaten. And when that odor is emitted, that is a cue for seabirds. And the seabirds can smell it, and they're like, oh, I'm going in the right direction towards the food. And it gets them into the area where food is for them because they're crossing the open ocean where there's not a whole lot going on. And so they rely on that sense of smell to find food. So I thought that was fascinating.
Wow.
Dimethyl sulfide. They call it DMS too. You can look that up.
okay.
So for seabirds, sense of smell, I think leatherback turtles that cross ocean basins across the open ocean, they have a gland on their head called the pineal gland. And they believe, I think I've read this, that this pineal gland may be a sensor for the light as well as maybe magnetic too, for orienting around the earth, which is really cool. We don't have something like that. Other things are like the opportunity to float, so to drift and be near the surface, like some of the plankton and the jellies. Also, I'm thinking about camouflage. And you might have seen some really cool pictures of certain animals that have like really iridescent blue and clear to them, like these animals called blue buttons and lullabillas. Yeah, so it's kind of a way to not be seen from looking down on it and not being seen from looking up. So it's kind of like counter shading.
Yes.
So camouflage too, which is really neat. So it really depends on the species, depends on are you migrating or is that your habitat? And lots of adaptations, really fun to learn about.
Okay, so I have another question. So I'm like really interested in the DMS utility. So I was wondering, do the birds that eat the phytoplankton, zooplankton, do they release that gas on purpose, or is it like something like a fart or something where it's kind of uncontrollable? But
That's an awesome question. It's kind of like when you're near somebody and you can smell, oh, they're having French fries. It's not intentional, but you can tell. It's just a natural occurring thing. So I didn't tell you this, but I actually hosted a radio show for a couple of years, about 10 years, and it was called Ocean Currents, and I interviewed all these different ocean experts. And I will send you a link to the webpage that has the podcast on. It's also in iTunes. But I interviewed a scientist who was studying this dimethyl sulfide in relevance to seabirds, because a lot of seabirds pick up plastic. And people have been wondering, why are they eating plastic? And so his whole PhD study was around, is smell of plastic a factor in eating the plastic? And what he did was he studied, he put plastic out in bags to contain in different areas, and then would study the whatever landed kind of organisms land on surfaces. And he actually worked with UC Davis. They have a wine college, like the smells, different smells, and he would use their wine equipment for determining the smells. But basically, what's really cool is that plankton in the water, some types of plankton settle onto and make a film, like a plankton film. And that's indicative of the food web. And so he was studying the smell of that. And hey, that could be one of the reasons why seabirds are picking up the plastic. They think it's food because it smells like plankton. So I will send you the link to my webpage that has these episodes on it. And then also look in iTunes. It's called Ocean Currents. It's like super buried at this point, I'm sure, because I haven't been able to produce shows anymore, but there's some great interviews in there. You're going to have fun with it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
So one of our other questions was, so you're seeing the seabirds, right? So take them, for example, how have they adapted to these extreme challenges?
Yeah.
So like, is it through evolution or, so how does it work?
Good question. I think we're still trying to learn that. What I've noticed about nature in my work as an educator and someone who works closely with scientists, and my work is helping to interpret the science and educate people about the cool stuff we find. But nature is really resilient, and life wants to live. And if there's a way to live, it's going to live. And so nature has been extremely resilient. Seabirds are really strong animals. And I think the animals that have lasted the longest on our planet are the ones that have been able to continually evolve, like leatherback turtles and white sharks. They are some of the oldest organisms on our planet, back from when we had dinosaurs. And they're still here. So there are ways that they can adapt. How are seabirds adapting? Well, seabirds can move because they fly. So they can move to different areas for finding food if it's a food situation. In terms of breeding, that's a challenging one because the birds that migrate here from far, far away, they breed in special areas based on the climate that they prefer. So they might have to find other areas. Around here, we have breeding seabirds on the Farallon Islands and along the coast. And how do they adapt? It's very much based on the weather conditions and how they do. And so seabirds, if they're having a great year, meaning there's a lot of food in the ocean, they might actually lay a second clutch of eggs, sometimes a third clutch, for breeding success. And so there are certain birds that's an incredible adaptation strategy. It's like, oh, this is a good year for food. We're going to have a couple different eggs so that we have more opportunity for our species to continue. So I think that's really interesting. I believe it's Cassinose auklets that do this, and they eat krill. So they breed out on the Farallon Islands, and they can have multiple what they call clutches of eggs. So that's a cool adaptation strategy. When the food is not that great, meaning it's just the conditions aren't good, we might be in an El Nino year where there's not a lot of cold water upwelling, they will just not go through breeding at all. And they'll just wait and save that energy that is needed for raising an egg and a chick. So that's an adaptation. Pay attention to your surroundings overall. Other seabirds, some other strategies. So those big, long tube-nosed birds, the albatrosses, they have a lifelong pair. meaning that they find one other albatross and they breed with that albatross for their life. But if that albatross dies at sea or is hooked on a long line, unfortunately, and the other one's back at the nest, like, where's my partner? They will adapt by finding another partner. It might take a couple years, but they will find another partner. Another thing is that there's some sharing that we've learned about that happens. And some albatrosses, if they're egg died or something, they'll help another clutch to survive. So incredibly collaborative. They really want life to succeed. So there's some interesting strategies for seabirds. And that's just a couple species. I know there's so many more too, I'm sure, but I think those are just a couple stories to get you started.
Wow. So for the albatrosses, when like their chick dies, is it like they're particular about what other clutch they decide to help, or is it like I'm open for the community?
That's a great question. I bet you some scientist has looked at that. I don't know. I've read that typically it's a male-female pair, but there have been new discoveries of finding like female-female pairs and two females helping each other with an egg, and kind of like an auntie or something. And the social parts behind it, I don't know that much about, but there's a lot of really cool pieces to it.
That's awesome. So have you ever gone on any of the Nautilus expeditions before?
Yes, I've been so lucky. I got to go out twice on the Nautilus. It was so exciting. I have to probably say it was like the highlight of my career, and I've been doing my work for 23 years with NOAA, and before that I was a seasonal park ranger and taught environmental education. But one of the great things about Nautilus and the Ocean Exploration Trust is they have a strong component for sharing the findings. And they, as you know, you can watch live exploration happening while it's happening. And everybody's mic'd up in the control room to communicate about what's going on. So I was brought on to help be one of the communicators, because they also do a program where they do these ship to shore interactions where we do a Zoom or a Google Meet with either a classroom or a museum audience from the ship to the audience. And it's nice to have someone who's not having to be on the dot, following the day for the science expedition, to be free to be able to do these presentations. So my colleague, our research coordinator, she was basically having to be on all the time to be able to respond to weather conditions and our target areas for research. So I'd be free to go do these presentations. And then I got to go sit in the van next to them and help communicate and translate some of this complex stuff. And so talking about, why is this important? What is interesting about this? And having it, being able to engage with the broader audience more, because the scientists get very focused on their stuff. Some of the scientists are amazing communicators, though, really, really good. So that was my job. I also got to help in the lab with processing samples, and I would also write up stories for sharing with the media. If we had interesting findings, I'd just send it out and be like, this is what we saw, this is so cool. Also posting on social media. So it was really, really rewarding to be able to explore parts of our sanctuaries that had never been seen before, and being on the ship and watching it and communicating about it at the same time was very rewarding for me. So it was very exciting because, most of our stuff is hidden. So to have this opportunity to be like, here it is.
So, like you said, you were on a few Nautilus ship rides, and have you ever seen any crazy animals you've never expected to see? And what's your favorite part of each ship ride?
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, and I forgot to finish my first answer, that the two cruises that I went on were in our local sanctuaries, so Greater Farallones and Cordell Bank sanctuaries, and we were in our deep ocean environments. Well, for me, it was super exciting, and it was exciting for the science team too, because we had never seen these areas before, and we really had no idea. And it was so funny, there's all this excitement about getting on the ship and preparing and communicating. And at one point I was like, what if we just see mud? How are we going to make mud exciting? I got really worried because you know what? A lot of the ocean seafloor is just mud. Yeah. And what happens if we just see that? But the part that was, well planned on our part, Danny is an amazing scientist, but we collaborate with so many different people. And you don't just go and then drop a camera in and be like, let's see what we see. We actually do quite a bit of planning by looking at maps. And some of the maps are very specific to the seafloor type based on a special type of resolution of data we have. It's called side scan sonar, and that helps us to get a really high resolution of what the seafloor is, meaning is this soft or is there rocky areas here? And so having this high resolution imagery from mapping helps us to target certain areas. It's kind of like if you had a choice of grocery stores to go to and there's one that you really like, it's the best one, you want to look on the map to find out where it is so you can go straight there. And it's the same thing in the ocean. We want to go to the areas that are most likely to have life. And so by having the maps, we can target those areas. And so we did that. We looked at areas that had a good chance of having what we call rocky features or rocky substrate, because that's where seafloor organisms can attach. They attach to something to hold on, like corals and sponges, but they can't do that in the mud too well. Okay. And then once you have animals that hold on to rock, they build a mini reef, and then other animals come. And so to me, it was super exciting to explore when we really didn't know exactly what we were going to see. And to see such a diversity of different types of deep sea corals right off our coast in these deep waters was super exciting. I think one of the most memorable parts for me was this one wall. It was a very steep wall. And it was just like, I spent a lot of time hiking. And so you see a lot of cool geology. And I just was imagining myself like hiking because it was like this cool wall. But it was just covered with different types of invertebrates hanging on it. It was really colorful with sponges and crinoids and sea stars and corals. And we spent a lot of time there scanning up and down. So that was really cool. Also seeing a sea pig. I had no idea what sea pigs were.
I love
what sea pigs are.
I am like a sea pig obsessor. So my first favorite animal is siphonophore. Second is the sea pigs. They're so cute.
Yeah,
oh my God. We're actually talking about them in this podcast episode. So,
and we're talking about immortal jellyfishes, which is better than the sea pigs.
We're in this immortal jellyfish. So we're kind of going back and forth because I'm like, the sea pigs, and then he's just like, the immortal jellyfish. So what are your favorite animals in the deep sea and open ocean?
Oh, so many. It's like, which day is it, really? I guess in the deep sea, I think my favorite are the bamboo corals because they look like skeletons. They look so fragile, like they could just fall over, but they're so strong and they're slow growing and they're really fascinating. They have these nodes in between, so they kind of do look like skeletons because, like a skeleton, you have a bone and then you have cartilage and then you have bone again. Well, these bamboo corals have like the calcium carbonate, and then they have this proteinaceous node, another one, and that helps it to orient to current for food, like to grow a certain way. It's super interesting.
That's so cool.
But the fact that these they have all these polyps on them that are just beautiful, and the fact that they just wait for whatever comes their way for food is amazing. And the other part being that these sea stars will crawl up their skeletons and hang out. You've probably seen this a lot in other Nautilus cruises.
Yeah.
As a way to like get free food. Like
the sea, like they can do the work here.
it's just really interesting. It just shows you how interconnected life is, and it just is we see that in many ways, but seeing it in the deep sea too, it's like, wow, we are such an interconnected planet, the way animals rely upon each other to survive, including us as humans. We rely on each other, and we rely on the ecology of the animals, of the diversity that we have for medicine, for food, for learning about everything. So I just feel like it's just another illustration of how important it is to conserve and preserve the amount of life that we have so that we can continue to prosper.
That was inspiring.
Yeah, next episode, you will hear about the weird and wonderful animals of the open ocean.
Ooh, I can't wait. Bye!
Bye!
And see you in the next episode.